So the chapter that I want to discuss is No Longer Waiting for Messiah, which is upcoming in volume Anxiety Culture with John Hopkins University Press. I actually wrote it before I wrote my book, and you can probably notice that it was written during the pandemics, meaning before the war, when the war would be maybe even more appropriate depressive context to writing it. But maybe on the other hand, pandemic is more universal experience of suffering that we went through. But anyway, so the I think coolest example that I'm starting with in this chapter is the Mapo Bridge. The Mapo Bridge is known to be what is called commonly a suicide bridge. It's a bridge in South Korea, which had the highest number of suicides. And there was a campaign that was launched in 2012, a grandiose, dramatic campaign of prevention of suicides, and lots of organizations and the government was involved to transform Mapo Bridge, which was known as Bridge of Death, commonly to Bridge of Life, meaning turning it into this positive therapeutic space that promotes like life affirming place. And there were one of the companies that were involved is Samsung Life Insurance, and you can Google their advertising, again, grandiose advertising campaign of how the bridge is transformed into bridge of life. So there were psychiatrists and psychologists who work with suicide prevention were involved in this. So grandiose, huge project when they have those pictures of happy children and smiling people and various slogans that would light up, like something like sun will rise tomorrow or worries are nothing, like very positive space. And ironically enough, this worked in the opposite, dramatically opposite way. It actually increased as a result of this campaign, maybe most probably the suicides were just, the number of suicides increased more than 6 times. So it worked the opposite way. And what I'm trying to elaborate on in this chapter is that something like our society, which is called by Philip Reeve, for example, therapeutic society, is so Mapo Bridge can serve as an exaggerated illustration of what we are going through in our society, how our modern society functions with the oppressive injunction of enjoyment, society that is positive and psychologized. And I would also claim that if Mapo Bridge can serve as a symbol of our culture, our existence, that instead of connecting with each other through suffering, through care for other suffering, we just substitute the solidarity and genuine care for each other with the suppressive demand of positivity. And then I'm developing the idea of oppressive demand of positivity. This is what Zizek calls injunction to enjoy, that is prevalent in our culture, the demand to enjoy that we feel. Alenka Zupancic would follow him, and critical theorists talking about biomorality. The positive biomorality in our society was the axiom that we're supposed to be happy, and this demand to be happy is moral demand, meaning we kind of feel that we presuppose that we are sinful if we are suffering, if we are not turning any negativity into positivity. And Alenka Zupancic describes it as our own gulag, the society that turns into the gulag, meaning we're torturing ourselves with this demand to be happy, demand to turn negativity into positivity, because not only we feel unhappy, but this demands also additionally tortures us because we are there's something wrong with us because we are suffering. Like if it's not normal to be unhappy, then just by being unhappy, we twice more unhappy because of this demand. So it's the oppressive demand of positivity. And the connection with Christianity that one can demonstrate here is this kind of therapeutic culture that we have today and religious culture that was dominant before therapeutic culture, at least according to Philip Reeve, who claims that current therapeutic culture comes to substitute religious culture, and they are not completely opposite to each other. We might draw some links between them, and one of the links is that maybe the way Anders Sørensen claimed, for example, that it used to be salvation, the need of salvation from sin, salvation of soul, and now it transformed into earthly salvation, salvation from negative aspects of worldly existence, salvation from suffering, internal suffering. And the structure remains same, this basic structure that we exist in hell, and we supposed to reach heaven in some way. In religious culture, it was through erasing sin, in a way, saving soul, and heaven was in afterlife. Now, currently in therapeutic culture, it's salvation in earthly life from inner suffering. And but the idea is same. There is something wrong, and we can fix it. And there are different people who are responsible for this process. It used to be Christian pastors who are guiding us to salvation of soul, and now it's therapeutic practitioners, therapists of various kinds in the therapeutic culture who guide us, who save us from depression and anxiety. And it's in a similar way, well, obviously it's manipulative, but in a similar way, like with the principle of that there is no salvation outside of church. The current principle is also there is no salvation, this earthly salvation, outside of the psychological discourse, outside of psychiatry, psychology, or psychoanalysis. Like there is no way you can be say, and you can feel it probably when you are depressed, the way, or you just feel intensely sad, because sadness is stigmatized in current society. Automatic response of other people and of yourself is to go to therapy, like that you're not allowed to deal with yourself, to be on your own. Even if you have depression, it automatically means that you have to see therapists, like you're not, it belongs to a therapist. Even in a way, sin belongs to church. It's the stuff that church have to deal with. You're not allowed to do it yourself, or to even reinterpret yourself. So there is this manipulative help. We can say there are messiahs who know the way how a healthy psyche supposed to look like, and before it was how proper healthy, we can say, sinless soul supposed to look like, and what is the path to salvation. It's the church who is responsible for it. Now it's this therapeutic structure with therapists who are responsible for this kind of salvation, and there is no salvation outside of this structure. There are messiahs, people who play a role of messiah, so we believe that they are who are guiding us to at least this kind of salvation now. And with psychoanalysis, it's interesting because obviously Freud claimed that he is anti-religious and he was criticizing explicitly religion, but it's not completely honest response to religion. It's not completely honest Freud, because there is other Freud who, for example, in his correspondence with Pfister, Protestant minister, would claim that they have, through different routes, they actually guide humanity to have same objectives for pure humanity. I don't know which exactly, maybe making them more moral, not more happy, but there is some similarities between, not only contradiction between psychoanalysis and religion, but also substantial similarities. So at the same time, psychoanalysis, and this is what Philippe Rive also points out, that if psychoanalysis comes to substitute religious perspective, it also inherits some substantial amount of features from religious perspective. It contradicts it and it inherits lots of things from it at the same time. And Freud was at the same time promoting this kind of religious perspective or practice or features or religious features, and at the same time was fighting with them. And Foucault showed this, for example, talking about psychoanalysts as a practice of confession, where psychotherapist, psychoanalyst represents the instance of truth, who know how to interpret unconscious, and the psychoanalyst who is supposed to open up to psychoanalyst, meaning there is a process of guidance somewhere. And early Freud was quite similar in this positive intention of elevating suffering, thinking, well, early Freud, for whom human was guided by the pleasure principle, meaning psychoanalyst as practice originated within the early Freud conception, thinking that we're supposed to have pleasure, and there's oppressive culture that precludes us from gaining pleasure. And the role of practical psychoanalysis was to allow maybe more pleasure. But there are two Freuds. I think this is something I would develop in my book more. The positive Freud, the early Freud, who has more, who inherits this substantial features from religion, and late Freud, I would call him negative Freud, who is disillusioned in psychoanalysis, but the way therapeutic culture functions and all the talking therapies that come to, that originate after Freud invented practice of psychoanalysis, they are all have their origin in early positive Freud, meaning serving the function of salvation from suffering. At late Freud, who is disillusioned in practice of psychoanalysis, in idea that human being can be described through the pleasure principle, and it's rather human being that is a self-destructive creature, creature of death drive. This Freud, what I'm developing in my book, Negative Psychoanalysis, is this Freud is more opposed to the idea of salvation. He's not about salvation anymore. He's disillusioned in salvation and in this role of psychoanalytic practice. So Freud would later say that he doesn't want psychoanalysis to be a profession of that has to do with priests and doctors. And now he failed, I think, in our, especially in American context, which is positive context. It's psychoanalysis and other talking therapies are reduced to the idea of this kind of psychological salvation and efficacy of this salvation. And so this would be rather, this hope would be rather the hope of late Freud. And I end chapter with idea that if Mapo Bridge is the symbol of our existence, instead of making it oppressive space of imposing idea of necessary enjoyment and turning negativity into positivity, which doesn't help, only make things worse anyways, when we suffer more because we try not to suffer. Instead, one could turn it into a breach of death, like admit culture in general, admit the impossibility of salvation, abandon the idea of that salvation is possible, and that there are messiahs, either in a form of priests or form of therapists, who know, who can guide us to salvation, and who can guide us to happy life or afterlife, and just more maybe embrace mortality, because this bridge and each of us is approaching their own death. We're not approaching salvation, we're just approaching death, and this is what we share in common most genuinely. I didn't write about it in the chapter, but depression and anxiety, trauma, except for depression, is currently seen as chemical imbalance, which is true, like from perspective of chemical perspective, but it also at the same time for me is the death, like how emotionally death of God is coded into us, how it feels. It's not only chemical imbalance, but it's also loss of God, death of God, how we feel it. And this kind of loss, that's why I see, one of the reasons I see depression or just intense sadness or anxiety as what we share in common. And psychoanalytically to say psychoanalytically is to share nothing. And I would claim that this therapeutic culture, because I still think that the Mapo Bridge of death that represents our culture would still be therapeutic, but not in a way of salvation, but in a way of taking care of each other without hoping for salvation. And taking care of each other is not fixing each other, because fixing for me is not is keeping a blind eye on suffering of the other, but actually caring without a hope that it will help, or recognizing the suffering of the other without a hope that it can be substantially fixed. So sharing nothing and suffering, the choice is between suffering together and suffering separately, not between suffering and not suffering. And the last slide, which summarizes, I think I mentioned it to Peter before, but the quote, I found the meme that summarizes well this chapter and my book in general. Like Lady Gaga actually says it better than me. This is what the chapter and my book is all about. And I think Lady Gaga, her grandmother, she claims, told her that if you see somebody who is hurting, don't look away. Like that's the only principle that summarizes the whole chapter and the whole book. Something I was trying to express.